Hi, everyone. This is Krista Moore with The Krista Moore Show. I just want to say hello to all of you and welcome our guest today. I've been so looking forward to interviewing her, Lisa Gschwandtner, and you're going to help me with that last name.
That was wonderful. You did amazing. Thank you.
I was telling her earlier, around here we know her as Lisa G. It's kind of like Kenny G, but it's Lisa G, so it should feel pretty good. You're like a celebrity.
I am like a celebrity. Thank you. Thank you for validating my celebrity status.
That's right. And many of you know your family and certainly know your father and his history at Selling Power magazine, but you are the editorial director, so I'm so thankful to have you here. And we just met maybe a couple of months ago. Yeah. And we had an instant connection.
We did. We met because you were a panelist at a Sales 3.0 conference, which Selling Power is a media co-sponsor of. And you were participating in a panel discussion that we put together about women in selling, which was amazing. You did.
Well, and I thought we had some really great discussions around the subject. And it's such an important one that I wanted to have you on the show. Let's talk about it. I'd love to hear some of your expertise on this subject and what you've seen from sellers throughout the world. And just really give our listeners some great takeaways to help them better understand the gender differences within organizations today.
Wonderful. I'm happy to do that. And I'm really happy to be here. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Sure.
I'm so glad that the sales profession seems to be having a gender moment, as I am coming to think of it, when it comes to selling and planning ahead and looking to the future. A lot of what I do in my role as editorial director is filtering stories, information, announcements, whatever is on the cutting edge. It's all coming to me, and Selling Power is a filter for it. And the Sales 3.0 conference, the reason we have such a strong affiliation with them is one, it's a second brand for us. So there is the Sales 3.0 conference team that produces brands, but Gerhard Schwantner, my father, who founded Selling Power in the 80s. It was a newsprint, like a folded over tabloid newsprint before it was a magazine. He purchased the conferences in 2007 because he saw this as an emerging area, right? This was right as user conferences were really taking off. So our job, yes.
I was gonna mention, I think that this year was the first year that you actually had a panel that was focused on women in sales or women in sales leadership. Is that right?
Yes. This is interesting for me personally because the first article that I ever contributed to Selling Power magazine, for a long time before I became editorial director, I was a contributing editor. So I would write articles and they would get published in the magazine. And my first one was published in 1998. It was called Muddy Waters, and it was a how-to article for sales managers who had to create and implement sexual harassment policies, right? So this was in the wake of the Anita Hill hearings, which I think happened in 1992. So all companies and professions had to figure out, what does this mean? And I remember writing about the two things with sexual harassment is quid pro quo, and which is do this and then you'll get advancement, right? It's very clear cut legally. And then there was something called hostile environment. And that was why it was called Muddy Waters, because people were really trying to figure out, sales managers had to be responsible for, what does this mean? And it's funny because that's something that came up at the Sales 3.0 conference in your panel discussion. I think Cynthia Barnes was on stage and she mentioned that companies need sexual harassment policies, and they need them internally and they also need them externally because they're
and she was mentioning, I think it was right after there was a lot going on with the Me Too movement, and she was asked by Forbes magazine, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, and she surveyed her members of the National Association of Women Sales Professionals and asked them, posed a question, and got some survey results, and it was pretty astonishing.
Yes, it happens. It happens. And this is one of the things that's so interesting to me because now I have put my writer's brain, my editor's brain is now focusing on this topic. And what the data is showing, if we look at data, I don't like to start, sexual harassment policies are very important. They're very needed. But where I like to start, I find that the word policies, the concept of policies, is not something that really fires up a sales leadership audience.
That's right.
Policies is something that belongs to HR. That's really not something we're interested in. We're interested in driving revenue. We're interested in profitability. We're interested in creating a really efficient sales team, right? We're interested in enabling our sellers, right? There is this tendency, perhaps, for some sales teams, sales organizations to think of gender as kind of like, well, I will think about that when we can get to it. It's not very high on the priority list. Ironically, what I am seeing, based on the data, gender is your competitive differentiator in your sales organization. This is an invisible component that is going overlooked. So it really would benefit you if you want to create a very competitive sales team. You want to achieve gender equality on your team.
Yeah, let's talk about women in sales in general. And are there some statistics in terms of they are better salespeople, or do they make better salespeople? Is it their kind of innate characteristics? What do you think about that?
So again, I'm finding that there is a lot of terrific research coming out now about this. This is data that people are very interested in and paying attention to. So there are two studies that I would encourage people to check out because I've read them. They're very robust. They're very comprehensive. They're global. They have a huge data set. One is a joint collaboration between McKinsey and leanin.org. And it is from 2018. It is I can't remember the name of it, but that should be enough to get you there. And there is a second study by Exactly Corporation, if anyone is familiar with that. Exactly is a sales compensation and incentives platform. They do much more than that. I'm not doing them enough justice by describing them that way. But Selling Power has done work for a long time with Exactly. We've had Chris Cabrera, their CEO, at our conferences. I've met him. I've interviewed him. And Exactly is really great because they are focused on sales compensation. They decided to look at the whole issue of pay gap. So based on these two studies, here's what we know. Women are vastly underrepresented in sales positions, both on the individual contributor level and on a leadership level. For individual contributors, they're about 23%. For leadership positions, it's about 26%. Those numbers have stayed flat for more than a decade. What the data also shows is that women are underpaid based on their variable compensation and their base salaries. They tend to be underpaid. Exactly has really robust data on this. Exactly also has really robust data around the fact that despite the underrepresentation, despite the fact that women are paid less in general than their male counterparts, they hit quotas more consistently, and women who manage sales teams, their teams tend to hit quota more consistently. So this is why I say that I really think that this is a competitive differentiator for sales teams. I cannot tell you how many articles and for how many years I've been writing articles that talk about how do I get my B players to act more like my A players? Or, how do I get my middle performers out of their ruts? I think that the gender imbalance is in part the answer to that question.
So I love some of the stats that you're sharing, Lisa. And the one that intrigues me is women or female sales leaders tend to have more female sales reps on their team than the men counterparts. So when you're talking about creating competitive teams, and if women are winning more deals or meeting their quotas, is that where you're connecting that more women naturally have more women on their sales team?
To me, I like to think about, because the other interesting thing that happens when you dig deeper into this question is our unconscious ideas about gender and which gender owns certain traits or characteristics, right?
Mm-hmm.
If sales managers, if they were all babies or 6 years old, I would say we'd have a better chance of achieving gender equality and parity, because children, babies don't have all the baggage of bias that adults do. So I think the first step is for everyone to realize that a bias exists, and that it's unconscious, that we all have blind spots. That is women included. I am not picking on men here. There's a lot of the way that the power structure works to create incentives for the subjugated group, which would in this case be women, to police themselves, so to speak, and to take on those barriers. So I have a feeling that what you're talking about in terms of women who run largely women-centered teams is a sort of reaction to women are looking for opportunities. They're looking for ways to succeed. And what they see is that, listen, we can't really get that far. Remember what I said about those stats, these numbers about promoting women to leadership roles, about even getting representation of sellers on the team, they have stayed flat. So if you're a woman, you see an opportunity in sales, but you see, I'm not going to get promoted. Whatever I'm doing doesn't seem to be working in this space. I'm going to create a space outside of this, and I'm going to make my own team.
Well, and the one thing that I remember in my days in sales and sales leadership is it was always a male-dominated industry. But if there were women that were promoted to management, I did see women kind of lifting other women up or offering stretch assignments to get them exposure. And I think it was intentional. And maybe that exists for females, and that's a little bit different than for men. I'm just curious about that.
About,
well, like, are men conscious about that? Like, hey, I'm going to build my sales team and I'm going to make sure they're all guys because we're going to be like a football team. You know, I mean, I'm wondering if there's any studies on that.
I think there is a natural tendency for, it is very interesting when you start to dig into the research about bias. One of the things I did in preparation for this conversation, I had a call with Cassie Rosengren, who runs a sales, talent, and recruitment firm called Digital Knack based in Los Angeles. And she has done presentations about this topic, and she was educating me about the concept of performance bias, something called performance bias, something called attribution bias. So one of the reasons that men tend to get hired over women for sales teams, and they're complicated reasons. What men can do is, what everybody can do, first of all, is recognize they have these biases, right? Like everybody has a bias of some kind to some extent. Second, if you have a question, a lot of the questions that you get when you're evaluating a sales candidate, you are evaluating that person for potential. So Cassie said to me, let's say a hiring team, let's say a sales VP, somebody from marketing, and the CEO are interviewing both a man and a woman for a sales job. And they say, look, we would need somebody to come in and open up a sales office on the East Coast. You know, you're West Coast based. Do you have any experience doing that? So the performance bias here is that the man will be evaluated based on his potential value, where the woman will be evaluated based on just her potential, right? So let's say neither candidate has experience doing that. The man is much more likely to say, I don't have experience doing that, but I'd love to. I'd be psyched to do that. Here's how I would make it happen. Whereas the woman is more likely to say in a job interview, no, I've never done that before. And wait to be invited to say, well, if you were to do that, how would you do it? So women can sort of counteract the bias by highlighting or spotlighting their potential value, by making sure that they are confident enough to step into that space in an interview and say, here is my potential value. I've never done that before. I'd be really excited about the opportunity. Here's something I did that was like that. Here are the measurable results I got. I mean, this is just like, you know, on a sales call. This is what you do. You just do it in terms of hiring. Do not wait to be invited, because when that team, when the sales VP and the CEO and the marketing manager or the product manager get together, here's where attribution bias tends to come in. We tend to think of the dominant group, right, which would be white men. Hi, guys. Glad you're here and listening. The dominant group, we tend to think of them as having innate characteristics. They are born to succeed. They are naturally competitive. They are naturally, you know, assertive. They are
and really that stereotype of the consummate sales leader or sales professional.
And so the hiring team is going to have more confidence in guessing. And this is gut instinct, right? Because as Cassie said during our conversation, a hiring decision is at the end of the day a leap of faith, right? So if you're going to make a commitment to onboard somebody, you're going to go with your gut, and based on our unconscious bias and everything we see around us, we're going to say, you know, I think the guy can get it done for us. I just think the guy can get it done for us. I feel like the woman isn't that confident. And
well, I'd like to add a couple of more thoughts to that too. And this also goes back to stereotyping and having that bias that exists that we might not even realize. A natural inclination might be, well, she might not be able to move because of her children or her husband's job, opposed to the man who would be the head of the household, perceived that he'd have a lot more flexibility in being able to move to the East Coast in that example.
This is something that came up in my discussion, again, with Cassie. Ask the questions in the interview that track back to your intention or to whatever your concern is. So identify what the concern is. Based on what you are saying, I'm hearing the concern is, can this candidate move? That is what you ask in the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Ask, do you have small children at home?
Yeah, exactly.
You don't ask. Actually, if you can get into legal problems if you start to do this. There are different states have different laws about what you can ask legally in an interview, and you could be putting your company at risk.
So I want to share something with you, because it just came to mind as you were describing, you know, the proper way to ask questions in an interview, or if you want to get some information, just ask more clearly and not beat around the bush. Well, this was 1998, and I was being interviewed for the VP of Sales for Corporate Express for the South Atlantic. And they had never had a female in that position before, nor did they have any females in this particular region in leadership. And the question they asked me is, what do you think our boys are going to think about a woman coming down from the north trying to tell them what to do? That was my interview question. And I mean, I'm sure that's, you know, not legal today or was even legal then, but he was pretty straight up. I mean, he was concerned about the perception of me coming down and leading an all male dominated sales team and how easy or difficult that was going to be for me, and how receptive were they going to be. But it was just, his way of asking that. I did get the job.
Do you remember how you answered that question in the interview?
I do. First off, I was like really taken back, but I didn't want to pretend or act like I was taken back. So I just, I answered it. I said, well, why don't you give me a chance and we'll see.
Nice. Good.
Yeah. I didn't know what else to say. Yeah.
Yes. Well, in some ways, the cultural moment that we're in with the sales profession has caught up to that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad the question is coming up. I'm glad he articulated that question.
Yeah.
Because it gets it out there. I mean, if he really felt the answer to that was, there's no way, he wouldn't have been interviewing you.
Yeah, I think when I rethink that question, it was probably posed to me for me to be thinking about, do you know what you're getting yourself into? You're coming from the north down to the south. You're a female. We're a bunch of white southern guys, gentlemen or whatever, and there's that perception of women in leadership. So I think it was kind of almost a precaution for me to be conscientious about the situation that I could be getting myself into. I want to talk about how today we're seeing that many Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies are looking to hire, intentionally are seeking out and hiring more women and more women in sales, and not necessarily just to meet some kind of quota that they need to have, but they do want to be more competitive, and they do want to have diversity in their teams. Also, diversity for their customers. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what employers can do to kind of put a plan together, or to kind of structure themselves to be more attractive for women.
Great question. Really great question. This is something I will be discussing actually in Las Vegas next month, September 16th and 17th at the Sales 3.0 conference. I will be moderating a panel discussion about gender and selling, and one of our panelists is going to be Ryan Bott. Ryan is SVP North American Sales at Sodexo, which is, I believe, a $25 billion company, global company. I think they have 500,000 employees worldwide. And they are ranked #1 in the US in terms of, by Diversity Inc., in terms of their equality, in terms of gender, race, and ethnicity on their teams. And they're really making a concerted effort to achieve equality in representation on their teams. And it is getting them really terrific results. Also interesting, the McKinsey, the joint McKinsey-Leanin.org study that I talked about earlier features Sodexo as a case study. There's a little mini blurb about that report. This is an issue that really matters: gender representation, gender equality, pay equality. This is an issue that really matters to the top level, to CEOs. So any VP or executive or manager who takes initiative to make this an issue is going to make your CEO happy, because this is where the world is going, right? Again, editing, in my role as editor and attending these Sales 3.0 conferences, which I've been going to for 8 years, part of our job is to tell people, this is where the profession is heading. We are going to help you skate to where the puck is going to be, and this is where we are going. So if you are an organization and you have a very homogenous sales team, your sales team represents your brand. Customers are absolutely, B2B buyers are doing their own purchase investigations online before they ever talk to salespeople, which means that your sales team has to really level up. They need better business acumen. They need to be able to sell to groups. They need to be able to sell in groups. Every pitch I get for content, almost every blog post, every article starts out with, selling today has gotten more complex than ever. And this is part of it. Gender is part of it, right?
When I think about gender in sales, and maybe this might be part of my stereotyping or bias, but I believe that there are some statistics around this, that the female energy or the female sales role really lends itself very nicely to the changes that are taking place in the sales process and sales cycle today, whether that would be relationship building, connecting, empathy, understanding, asking questions, listening, those types of consultative sales skills, I think really lend themselves nicely to the female energy. What are your thoughts on that?
I love that you're pointing that out, and I in part I really agree. Um, there's a very interesting. I love the moment that we are in time because there are all these software companies, and they love data and they love to mine their data. And there's one data analytics company, Gong, that has published, as they went through their data, they went through maybe 30,000 sales calls, and I'm assuming these are inside sales calls, to look at how men and women do in terms of closing based on their conversations. And this was really interesting data because the women closed at a slightly higher rate than the men, but they also broke more of the rules, right? So they tended to interrupt more, which is supposed to be a no-no. The men got, for some reason, the data showed that they were listening more. But again, the women were closing sales. So I think there may be nuances in even how we understand the concept of listening or empathy. Are you listening, or are you waiting for your turn to speak? There may be something about how women are conducting themselves on sales calls that is different. That it may be that men and women even listen differently.
Yeah. Or maybe we shouldn't even be looking at it as a gender characteristic. Maybe it's just kind of like who we are as salespeople or as people.
This is so interesting because I personally love and find fascinating someone like RuPaul or the Queer Eye guys, right? There's a lot of sort of, if you look for it, you can find these narratives about people who are living in a very fluid way and seeing gender as a construct. This is why I love RuPaul. He talks about gender constructs as a matrix, and that your gender is kind of a costume. And I realize that that could be a very threatening concept to some people and their terms of sense of self and identity. So I'm not necessarily recommending that people in this industry embrace that. But I find that it's interesting conceptually, and I think it adds value to the conversation, and this is why. I don't think that men or women have a lock on inherent traits or characteristics or attributes, right? I think men can be just as empathetic and compassionate as women. Women can be just as aggressive and dominant and, strong and powerful as men. Yeah. This is just all a question of how these qualities are best. So I like to think of rather than, I think that the reason this conversation is coming up is because there is such an overrepresentation of men in the sales profession.
Yeah, and I don't know too many little girls that said, I want to be a saleswoman when I grow up. It just has not been maybe thought of as a career path, but as a woman in sales most of my life and working with many sales leaders and sales representatives, I think that sales is an amazing career path for women for lots of great reasons. One, the income potential. Also, there's a lot of flexibility that is put into many sales roles, and so women that are balancing work and family and kids and school, often having a sales position will afford them the flexibility that they might need to, to care for their family a little bit easier or more conveniently. What would you say to the women out there that would like to apply for sales roles or sales positions. Any thoughts?
You can do it. You can do it. Do it. It's, I would say, um, look at the spaces where you feel that you could enter and move in that direction. I would also say, again, if you are like, in other words, if you look at this profession and think, well, these are all men, I really don't fit in here. You don't have to conform to a boys club. You don't have, you can be yourself, and you can express yourself however you want. You don't have to watch sports. You don't have to, do whatever is going on. You can, whatever the sales culture seems to be, there is a place for you within it. So claim that internally.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and then recognize that there may be some ways that you're used to presenting yourself because women are socialized to be kind, because women are socialized to be polite, because women are socialized to, can I make you more comfortable? Can I make the coffee? Can I bake brownies for everybody? You can let that stuff go too. If you are full of men, they will be fine, getting their own stuff.
Yeah.
Focus on what is important to you. And there is a ton of opportunity in this profession for women.
And I think too, for those that are interviewing for new sales people, new sellers, looking at them not as gender, but really as an individual, as a person, and their talents and their successes, and interview them as a person, not as a gender. The other thought I had too is retaining women in sales. I co-founded an organization 10 years ago. It's called Office Products Women in Leadership, because I was in a very highly male-dominated industry for a lot of years and didn't see the women growing and staying in that field and in that industry. And so this organization is just a way for women to create mentorship and also lead by example, and have kind of mastermind groups for sharing and forums for helping others with challenges. And I'm thinking that organizations just need to be very conscientious of things that they can do to retain women, and also women in sales. Can you think of a few things that you'd like to leave our audience with that maybe some organizations are doing that are very appealing?
Examine your gender pay gap if you have any. That's all data that you should have available. When you create your hiring profile, look at your weak points. And I have written many articles about this and helped, done many interviews about this. And hiring is an evergreen challenge for sales organizations and for sales VPs and people who are making hiring decisions. You need a profile, job profile, and you need to really take a look at your organization and think, what do we need? Maybe you have somebody on your team who is great at closing, mid-market business, but can't close with enterprise. Maybe you have, you're not getting enough ROI on your investment in lead generation, which maybe means that you need somebody who's going to be able to have really tight collaboration with marketing. Sales and marketing alignment, this is something we've been writing about for years. So look at the attributes and specific weak spots in your organization, and then map your hiring profile, your job description profile to those attributes. And then, as you said, Krista, remove gender from it. Understand that you may have a bias in thinking, well, I just feel my gut is telling me that the guy can get this done for us. Not every sales organization is going to succeed in the future by having hunters, lone wolves, and top performers. That is not what's going to lead to success anymore. Sales is not about, we're hiring this guy because he's a man, because he projects strength and power and because he has a good Rolodex.
Yeah.
I mean, a very dated way to look at your sales team. So open up your idea of what you might, like, really examine your organization and go in asking, what are my blind spots?
And I would add on to that too, just being aware of your interview process, and are there women involved in that? If I'm going to go for a job interview, I want to see people that I can relate to. If I walked in and it was just an all-male interview, that would feel very different than if there was a woman in the room. The other thing that I would recommend is coming up with some incentive programs, or or maybe more flexibility. And in-office daycare is, I guess, a good example of something that would be appealing to a female over a male, perhaps. Contests and things have always in the past, in very male-dominated industries, been geared towards, okay, you're going to win, this motorcycle, or you're going to, win this trip, and we're going to go smoke cigars, and we're going to play golf. Opposed to maybe some other things like a spa day, or a girls' getaway, or a retreat, as you and I spoke about, that might be more appealing to the female.
Yeah, ask your team. Ask your team. They have the answers. They know. Just go in and ask them. Say, this is an issue that we're working on. I'm waking up to this. I need your help. I need your input. And if you have all men on your team, go to some of the spaces where conversations are being had about this. The panel discussion in Las Vegas, women sales pros, just anybody who's shown up.
Yeah, I think it'd be important to mention Women Sales Pros, which is an organization of professional women that are focused on women progressing and growing in the sales industry, sales profession. Also, NAWSP, which is the National Association of Women Sales Professionals, is a wonderful national organization to align yourself with other like-minded women that might be facing similar challenges. And I'm sure, like, NOPA is another one, I'm trying to think of another women's organization. NAWBO, that's what I was thinking of, National Association of Women Professionals. But I think that alignment and feeling like you have that support, or that someone has kind of been through what you're going to be going through, and just have that mentorship, is extremely important. When I look back at my career in sales as one of the few female sales leaders, it was that mentorship of both men and women that I could not have succeeded without.
What we're looking for is a balance. We're looking for a balance within ourselves of how we show up for ourselves and other people, and we're looking for that balance to be reflected externally in the teams that we work with. So for many, many years, women who have joined sales teams and risen in the ranks have worked really hard to get on board with a boys culture and with the old boys club, right?
Yes.
And that has not been women in this conversation really don't want to be systems, and they really don't want to be seen as tokens. Tokenism, just saying, well, we want to make sure just like hire some random women, that's not going to do it, because your intention there is not going to be clear, right? You need a really strong intention. And this is why I say, if you are talking about being serious about hiring women, you want to make sure it maps to the needs of your organization. That only makes sense.
And to the customer.
And the customer representation. Lori Richardson is the other panelist who's going to be on stage at the same conference in Vegas, and she told me that she has heard of at least one, sales VP she interviewed said they lost a deal because they only had men on their team. And Ryan has some interesting stories too about I hurt him, and he said, you don't have enough women on, you need to hire 10 more women before you even call me.
This just reminded me of something, and I think I might have mentioned this to you. I remember when I was working for Corporate Express, we had a very large bank that was merging with another large bank. And one had a female sales executive and one had a male executive. And it was like, okay, who's gonna get this account? Of our two salespeople, who's gonna win? Well, everybody was going, straight for the guy. And I, in my heart, felt that the other sales rep that happened to be female would have done a better job or would have connected better with this merger. And so I was overruled. And I said, you know what? I think we should ask the customer. So we had both sales professionals put a resume together and go and interview with the customer. And they got to pick which one that they, wanted to be their account executive or their account manager. And I'm glad that we did that, because at the end of the day, they picked the female sales executive. And that's who we need to be concerned about, right? Is the customer at the end of the day.
Yes, and this is an issue. This is a topic that buyers and customers are really considering seriously. They're considering it. I mean, if your sales team is a representation of your brand, how do you present? How do you look to the outside world? And if you are selling to teams that are diverse in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, then how are they going to feel about working with you when you have a team of all men?
That's right.
Yeah.
See, this is a great discussion, and you and I, we could talk for hours on this. There's two things I wanted to make sure that we mentioned, though. I'd like to talk a moment about the retreat concept that I'm creating to get your opinion, because I value that. And the other question is, I'd like you to leave the audience with more information on the Sales 3.0 conference that's coming up, in case they're interested in attending in Vegas. So first off, I know I mentioned to you about, I believe that in order to make transformation or real change and growth, that the training kind of industry is shifting and changing. And I feel like I've been along that path for the past 20 years, where it was one-on-one coaching, webinars, in-person events, send people to a conference, do workshops, trying to get people to change and improve and grow in their sales leadership and sales skills. And I believe that this new format that we're introducing, which is more personal and really kind of getting them out of a work environment for a longer period of time and working through a program that will promote real change and real transformation, and that's through a retreat setting. There's health and wellness components to it, but there's learning and development components. And, we've started launching these and we're seeing great results. And I just kind of wanted your expert opinion on that, because you work with a big community of sales professionals all over the world. Do you see that could make a difference?
Yes, absolutely. This is the reason that companies internally put on their own retreats. If you think of a conference as a kind of mini retreat where you get out of your office and go to a place where there's 2 days of presentations by experts and authors and practitioners who are succeeding in the field, you do not know what you don't know. And we don't like to think about it. We don't like to focus on it. But in truth, what we don't know is vast. And that actually can be really exciting. You need to meet that. And a retreat, retreat is an ideal way to do this, because it really does, I think, activate your parasympathetic system in a way. I mean, as humans, you work with your mind, you work with your spirit, you work with your body, right? So just shifting geographically, getting your body, your physical body to another place is key, right? Yes.
Well, I was going to say, and when I think about retreats, I'm thinking about really working on you. And that is the mind and the spirit, so to speak, the mind, body, soul analogy. opposed to going and getting dumped on with information or, kind of like a workshop or a training event where I'm internalizing and I'm discovering more about myself and what I could do better or different and be intentional about making those shifts or making those changes, in the time that you've got that quiet time and you're being led, through business coaching.
Well, and this is interesting because I think this is where when you get what I've noticed after interviewing hundreds of, leaders and CEOs and executives, some really truly wonderful people. And when you get to the top levels, your job as a leader is really to manage emotion in other people. And managers understand this. Usually if you start, first you're an individual and you're doing the work and you're learning the role and you're doing the job and you're getting the skills.
Mm-hmm.
And move to manager, if you move to VP, if you move to executive, you find that your job is less and less about actually doing the work, the ground level work. It's more about enabling your team to operate at its best.
Yes.
That really involves managing emotion.
And relationships and communications. And
so especially important I tend to think of retreats as something that's like, that is sort of like the grad school for leaders. You have to do it in some way. And if you do not do it, something will be introduced to you in your life that will facilitate that, and it will usually manifest in the form of some kind of extreme thing, let's say, a sort of breakdown or meltdown, or Oprah has discussed this. Talks about the universe is always talking to you, and if you don't listen, it's like it'll ping you upside your head, and then the ping turns into a brick, and then if you really don't pay attention, the whole wall falls down. Right.
Yeah.
So
that's a great example, analogy of what could potentially happen if we're not taking care of ourselves in that right way. Mm-hmm.
And it is not easy. A retreat is not, all of the retreats that I've been to and attended, and Gerhard, who founded Selling Power, who's my father, he's launched his own retreats, and I attended the first one. And sometimes it's grinding work. It's not easy sometimes it's exhilarating. You never know what's going to come up.
Mm-hmm.
But it is excavating the layers of yourself. It's unblocking whatever internal blockages you might have, that whatever anchors are weighing you down, which we all have. Sometimes the only place you can really do that truly effectively is in a different setting, in a supported space where there's nature, where you're doing something physical, where you're doing something for your mind, where you're doing something for your spirit, and you also have the support of a group.
That's right.
Humans we are meant to connect with each other. We are not meant to live in isolation. We are not meant, solitude can be very important, but we are community based. The community is very important.
Well, and one of the key success factors that we see is those that are involved in forums or masterminds or communities that are supportive. And that's exactly what a retreat setting does. I kind of refer to it as group coaching, but often, there's a therapist as part of the team because we do get a little deep. I was going to suggest in the time that we had, why don't you tell us about Sales 3.0 and what your attendees can expect and some of the outcomes?
Thank you for asking. Sales 3.0 is, as I mentioned, this is to help you look forward, to get out of your office, to see what's on the horizon, to see what's on the cutting edge. Gerhard always likes to talk about Sales 3.0 in terms of people, process, and technology. And those are the three categories we really cover. We have great sponsors who can introduce you to solutions, things that may be right for your organization, conversational intelligence, artificial intelligence, all of these new tools that are on the cutting edge that are emerging all the time that can help sales teams. And we also talk about, again, that's technology. We also do people and process, right? So we have speakers who will talk about sales process. We will have speakers who talk about the buyer's journey, what's going on with buyers today. We have speakers who will also be focusing on the area of people in terms of gender, millennials, like how can I be the best manager or leader? How can I create a really productive, efficient, high revenue team?
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and show a slide here, Lisa, that has your email address and some additional information. And if anyone wants to reach out to you, I'm assuming this is maybe the best way for them to connect with you. And I know that you're very socially active, so following you on LinkedIn and Twitter makes sense. And maybe they'll get...
Twitter I like a lot more than LinkedIn personally. I have a Twitter bias. It's fun. It's a more fun for me personally.
Yeah.
So if you're on Twitter, but if you're not on Twitter, LinkedIn is fine. I know that a lot of people don't feel that the same way that I do. They like the other thing. So
that's fine. We know where we can track you down. So you win the award for the longest interview on the Krista Moore Show. I mean, usually I stop it at, right on the spot, 30 minutes, but I was enjoying it, and I'm sure that our audience was as well. So I want to thank you very much, Lisa, for joining in and sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us and your passion for this subject. So I will see you soon. Take care.
Everything you do. Thank you for the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.